Again, welcome. Thanks for coming. If you're looking for Marty Miller today, he has packed his tools and the archaeological dig has moved on. I hate to tell you that. So you get me today. We've got a new series beginning, a new quarter. So I want to welcome you to the Be Careful class. Now, I realize it's a vague title, and many of you are wondering what exactly is the Be Careful class, and is a Be Careful class for me. And let me just say, I did present this series on a Wednesday night back in 2019, so it's not the first time I presented it, but I have made a few modifications to it, and hopefully those of you that were with me in the class in 2019 have forgotten most of everything I said, which you probably did about a week after. So we're going to hit it again. But as for the answer to the first question, what is this class? I hope to answer that for you today. I'm going to do a bit of an introduction, an overview, and give you an idea of what this class is about. The "is it for me" question is a question you're going to have to answer yourself. And hopefully I'll see you return next week and the answer is an affirmative. But we have a number of good teachers, so I understand you have good options. But when I was young, I grew up knowing that Satan was real, but I thought for the most part he left me alone. He didn't impact me much. But what's becoming more obvious to me as I get older is that's not true. He's impacted me every day in all sorts of ways, continually. He's laying traps, he's setting cons, he's lying to me, he's deceiving me. Seems to be everywhere. And I remember the early part of the book of Job, and you remember that story, and God and Satan arrived, and God saw him, and he said, "Satan, where have you been?" And Satan's response was somewhere along the lines, just to and fro, going up and down the earth. And that kind of reminds me of the question you ask your 4-year-old, right? That has that very mischievous look on their face, "What have you been doing?" And they look up at you, just going to and fro, up and down the earth. I also think sometimes we tend to make the scriptures much more difficult than they really are. I happen to think that's one of Satan's greatest schemes. So I'm telling you right now, this class will be very simple. It's a class focused on things we all know, we've studied most of our adult life, but we struggle with. And some will say, well, if it's a class that we've studied things all along, why do we need to hear it again? What's there new to learn? And I'll go back to what I said earlier. I've always known Satan was around. I just didn't realize how prevalent he was in my own personal life, and he's in your personal life too. So all of us know what social influencers are, right? Well, if you don't, here's a definition, and this definition came out of the Beginner's Guide to Influencer Marketing. An influencer is someone who has the power to affect purchasing decisions of others because of their authority, their knowledge, their position, their relationship with his or her audience. They have a following in a distinct niche with whom he or she actively engages. It is important to note that these individuals are not merely marketing tools, but social marketing assets with which brands can collaborate to achieve their marketing objectives. So all of you know what social influencers are, right? They're constantly bombarding us with decisions to buy this product or this service because they have an association with somebody up here that's kind of providing, or there's some benefit to them to push a particular service or function. And we all need influencers. I mean, think about it for a second. All of us have had those in our lives that provided a great role model for us. They were a great example. They were mentors, maybe. But some influences in our lives are not good. Hollywood. movies, television. Some are musicians, actors, social media stars, world-class athletes, including those at one time performed as men that today now claim to be a woman. Social influencers do have impacts in our life. So let's remove a few words from this definition and look at it just one more time. Someone, not necessarily a social influencer, but someone who has an ability to influence decisions because of their authority, their knowledge, their power, their position, their relationships. They have a following and a distinct niche with whom he or she actively engages. These individuals are not merely marketing, but building social relationships. And you think about this for a second, and who comes to mind? Satan comes to mind. There is a master influencer in play. That's why it feels like Satan is everywhere. Satan and his evil brand had developed an enormous social marketing network that's even beyond what we can imagine today. It used to be we could go home, close the door behind us, and to some degree we could shut off all the influences and leave them outside. No more. They follow you right in the door. They're with you 24/7. And sometimes this world has become so evil, and the evil is so prevalent, that it's getting harder and harder to tell good from evil. It's very blurred. And in some way, our tolerance to evil has been compromised. We're more accepting of evil today than we've ever been, even for the mature Christians. And I'll say to you, with the advent of artificial intelligence, and I guess some of you have probably heard this new term, AI, artificial intelligence, it's going to be even harder to distinguish the visual real from what's evil, right? So if you need another reason to stamp God's message on your head and heart, well, we've got a reason, big time reason. And I suggest to you, really, how long is it going to be before we start seeing snippets in text of Scripture that has been modified in a way that the world wants to reflect it? And it's now being put out for the rest of the world to see. And if you don't know what the true text says, how are you going to be able to distinguish between the good from the evil? You know, the instruction that God gave his people in Deuteronomy 5 and 6 is a clear warning to us today of what's coming. It's always been around us, but what's coming. And in fact, if you go back and read that text a little bit, you'll see in numerous places throughout that text the words, be careful, with the intent being to know and obey God's truth. So this class, my friends, is about reinforcing spiritual fundamentals. It's about navigating some of life's simplest tasks and activities through the maze of deceptions and lies and cons and traps and snares that Satan sets for us every day. This need to be careful is real. Is it something we want to hear? Probably not. Is it something we need to hear? I would suggest to you we do over and over again. So let me get started this morning with the most basic of fundamental reminders. Lust, our sin, lust, our desire, produces sin, and sin leads to death. Paul tells us that in Romans 6:23. And very simply, when our thoughts and our attitudes are not fixed on God, we're vulnerable. And we're vulnerable on a 24/7 basis. So Lord willing, over the next 12 weeks, we're going to look at a number of topics, sort of following this theme. We're going to be looking at some of the things around be careful what you say. Probably not something that anybody needs any discussion around, but we're going to look at it anyway. What you think, how you walk, not only for us, but the little ones that are following in our footsteps. Be careful about the choices you make. Be careful how you run, what you sow. Another one of those that we don't probably need, but we're going to talk about anyway, jumping to conclusions. Does anybody do that? How about your attitude? And I know you're all thinking, well, I don't need a discussion on my attitude, but the person sitting next to me probably does. So that's probably a good one to leave in here. Be careful where you go. What you post, is that an issue for us today? For some, I think it is. How you spend your time. And be careful what you leave behind. And I will tell you, all of these things that I'm going to be talking about is really based off of a study series that was published in 1997 by a Church of Christ minister in Meridianville, Alabama, by the name of Willard Conkin. Now, I'm not following his outline in his study directly, but I am following a lot of his general premise, and so I wanted to give him some credit. I appreciate very much what he's done. So what does it mean to be careful? And I know some of you with small kids, some of you with small grandkids have already probably told them at least once, probably multiple times today, to be careful. Be careful to not wake your little brother or sister. Be careful not to spill your drink. Be careful not to run over somebody in our foyers. And what are we telling kids when we tell them to be careful? We're telling them these things. We're telling them to guard against mistakes, pay strict attention to details, use good judgment, avoid unfavorable situations, and make wise choices. Now, if everybody did these things, we would never have to use the term be careful. But we don't. And if you want to see this principle in action, just join us for our Wednesday fellowship meals in the gymnasium or the fellowship area. The kids, the boys especially, and I'm talking young boys, will eat very, very quickly and ask the mom and dad if they can go to the back and play, right? And the response from the parents is always, yes, but be careful. They're implying these things, but what's interesting is you watch the kids, the boys go to the back, and if there's a ball back there, it gets very interesting. But even if the ball is not back there, they can still be pretty creative with no props, but you get the idea. But you go and you watch those little boys back there playing, and there's a ball. How much thought do they give to the consequences of what happens if I kick this ball or throw this ball and I miss my intended target? They're not thinking about that, right? And so they dodge or they duck, and the little 3-year-old that happens to be walking behind them gets plucked in the head and knocked over. Or the ball ricochets against the wall, hits somebody in the back of the head, and 2 people collide. Never was intended, but that's what happens. Or maybe it hits off the wall, bounces on the table where you're enjoying your meal, and all of a sudden now you've got a ball in your mashed potatoes and spilled drink. But those of you with young boys know exactly what I'm talking about. Trips to the emergency room, busted lips, broken limbs. And you know, I have grown up my entire life, Sarah and I, with boys. So our experience is with boys. And my experience with little girls is still relatively new to me, but with granddaughters, I am getting a feel for little girls. And what I'll tell you, the little girls don't look any further ahead than the boys do, to be honest. And let's just say that old nursery rhyme about little girls being all sugar and spice is almost always true, but it's not always true. But that all changes, right, when we get a little older. When we get in our teen years, our early 20s, we start seeing problems and consequences from miles away. And we don't have any issues anymore, right? Well, maybe not our 20s, but at least when we get in our 30s and 40s, we get a far enough view we don't see them anymore, right? How about 50s and 60s or beyond? Have we learned anything by then? You hope so, but not always. In fact, I would tell you most of us, or some of us, me included, here in this room today, are sitting there thinking, wow, I did something in the last few days that I wished I hadn't done, or I thought about it, or what was I thinking? Why did I proceed with that? Which leads me to a riddle. I want you to ask me, what do these following 6 people that I give you have in common? Okay? Ralph Waldo Emerson, the Chinese philosopher Lei Chao, supermarket magnate Frank Outlaw, Buddhist philosopher Gautama, the father of Margaret Thatcher, and Nathan Ingram. Anybody? Well, these first 5 individuals are credited with a quote. This following quote. What's your thoughts, they become words. What's your words, they become actions. What's your actions, they become habits. What's your habits, they become character. What's your character, it becomes your destiny. I actually heard Nathan speak to this a few years ago, and it was very interesting to me. And so I really began to dig into it and study it. Not only study the thought behind it, but I got off on one of these rabbit chases and trying to find out who actually was the source of this quote. And I couldn't find anybody that was a definitive source of the quote. And the 5 people that I mentioned earlier were individuals that some had said was the originator of the quote. But I heard Nathan say it. So I'm going with Nathan until somebody proves me otherwise. So thank you, Nathan, for sharing your thoughts. I'm going to borrow them today, and I'm going to roll with them moving forward. Everything starts with a thought. What have you been thinking about lately? What are you thinking about this morning? What are you thinking about right this minute? This class is boring. I can't wait for the donuts. Be careful. Because whatever you're thinking about is going to eventually come flying out at many times the most inopportune time. And going a step further, whatever it is you're putting up here is going to eventually make its way out. So what are you reading? What are you looking at? What are you talking about? What are you watching? Which again is another reminder why getting in the scriptures every day is so important for us. But these thoughts lead to words. And words are symbols that communicate whatever's going on up here. What's swirling around our heads is eventually going to come out in our mouths. And it's a little bit like mouthwash. You put it in, you slosh it around, and you've only got 2 things you can do with it. You can internalize it, or you can spit it out. So whatever you have on your minds regularly, fears, sorrows, wants, needs, likes, dislikes, opinions, biases, what you've been reading, what you've been thinking about, those words are going to lead to an action. And those actions are either going to come from us, we're going to do something about what we just said, or somebody that hears us say something is going to do something about what they heard us say. And we know that words can bring us together, words can separate. Words can calm a tense situation, or words can ignite a firestorm of events. Look at all the hostilities going on in this country over an election that happened 4 years ago. And actions lead to habits. A habit is an action we do regularly, often without thinking about it. If we take an action and it feels good, or it produces a result that we like, we'll repeat it. And our days are full of habits. Just think about your morning routine. Some habits are good, some habits not so good. And habits repeated over time lead to character. Well, what is character? Well, character is our individual stamp of individuality. When we describe somebody else, what are we essentially describing? Their habits. I want something done right, I give it to so-and-so. I tell someone to be here at 10 o'clock, and I know they're going to be here at 10:05 or 10:10 or 10:15. We know that, right? When we tell them, we know they're going to be late. So one good challenge about habits is that it takes discipline to build good habits, but it also takes discipline to break bad habits. And habits don't form overnight. But deeds and misdeeds repeated long enough lock in as a habit. And that habit points us towards our destiny. Well, what's destiny? Something or somewhere for which a person is destined. Our destiny is essentially our personality, our nature, our temperament. It's an accumulation of years of thoughts, words, actions, and habits. I'm standing here today, 66 years of thoughts, words, action, habits, and character. And some of you aren't far behind me. Paul urges us in Ephesians 4:1 that I, therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called. Are our thoughts, our words, our actions, our habits, our character worthy of the calling to which we have been called? Does our daily walk match what we profess to believe? And if we're not careful, one misstep along the way can lead to a second misstep, can lead to a third misstep, and pretty soon we're in a downward spiral. Yes, but you say, I'm a mature Christian, full of wisdom. I can see deception and evil coming from miles and miles away. Study here in Genesis 13 is one of my favorites in all the Old Testament texts. It's not my favorite because of what happens next, what happens at Sodom and Gomorrah. It's my favorite because of what you're reading. And we all know the story. God told Abram to leave his homeland and go to Canaan, where he would become the father of a great nation. So he, Sarah, Lot did what they were told. God blessed them. They ran into a famine. They moved to Egypt. After a couple of deceptive instances, the Pharaoh in Egypt asked them to leave. And here we are. Abram and Lot had been blessed richly. Their flocks and herds were growing quite large. Strife was beginning to develop. And so Abram posed the question to Lot, hey, we got a problem here. We need to do something about it. I'm going to give you a choice. You can go to the right. If you do, I'll go to the left. Or you can go to the left and I'll go to the right. The fact that Abram and Lot were standing around Ai and Bethel means that they were in an area about 2,800 feet above sea level. And we know they were on a mountainside. So a nice panoramic view. Lot looked around, saw the beautiful green and plentiful water for irrigation in the Jordan Valley to the east. And he looked the other direction and he saw a parched land, dusty plain, in which rain was needed to produce the water levels. And for time's sake, we're not going to read the rest of the story because every one of you know the story, know it well. You know the choice that Lot made. He chose the Jordan Valley and moved near Sodom. Abram moved over toward Hebron, which is just south of modern-day Jerusalem. But there were a few ramifications to this decision, right? And again, we're not going to go through and talk about every one of these, but you know them. This second one, when we read the descriptions of what Sodom was like, they churn your stomach. They're very nauseating. But you look around our country and you see the same thing, right? It's just as perverse in our day and time today as it was what you read in Scriptures. This last one, the incense with daughters, led to the Moabites and the Ammonites. Became a constant thorn to the Israelites. In fact, some evidence suggests today that even Mecca was founded by descendants of the Moabites. So think about that just for a second. This decision that Lot made, we're feeling it today. We feel the effects of this decision today. And you know, it's easy to jump on Lot for this decision. We all tell ourselves, we wouldn't have done that. We wouldn't have made the decision that Lot made. What a silly decision he made. We tell ourselves that. But I think we need to be careful telling ourselves that. As you look at this slide, look at it for a second. I want you to think about it for a minute. But I borrowed this slide, by the way, from Dave Short. Dave had a class. I can't remember what class he was teaching when I found this slide, and I shamelessly stole it. But I guess the good point is to Dave and Nathan, if you're listening, I do pay attention when you're teaching. So keep teaching, brothers. You do such a good job. But the thing you notice when you look at this slide, this is a slide of the Abram's journeys. What you notice is he followed a trail that led along a path that was very prosperous and well fertile, right? All the way. So now you go to Lot, and he's making his decision. Do I go to the right or to the left? And he made a decision to go where the land was fertile and well watered, which was not a decision that he had spent his whole life making, right? And you may have remembered, and I didn't point it out, and I probably should have, a few in the verse text that I mentioned a while ago. Verse 13, there was a little phrase in there that said, Sodom was wicked and sinning greatly. So Lot's choice was really not necessarily to go to the right or go to the left. His choice was, do I move to an area where there's a potential for high prosperity, but it's going to place me and my family in an area that's not a good environment spiritually? Or it's going to be to a direction that I may not make as much money and be as good for my family, but I'm going to be put in an environment that's not as worldly. That was Lot's choice. And when you look at it in that context, how many of us are making that same decision? You look back on your own history, your own thoughts, some of the own decisions you've made, and we've made that same choice that Lot made. Right? On one hand, we can please ourselves and do what's best for me. But if I make that decision, I'm probably going to put myself in a position that's not going to make it easy to worship and honor and do the things that God asked me to do. Or I can take this and make this decision that's going to be really good for me and my family, but I'm going to have to deal with the consequences of being in an ungodly area. Some of us may be even contemplating a decision like that right now. And it doesn't even have to be a major decision. Sometimes it can be a seemingly minor decision that's just the first domino to drop, and then everything else begins to follow after that. And you know, I've always found it interesting that two of the most significant decisions we make in life, we make when we're young. We make one when we're about 16 or 17, 18. And we make the other one generally in our 20s. That first decision is, what are you going to do after you graduate from high school? Are you going to go into the workforce? What are you going to do? What skill are you going to learn? Are you going to go to college? If I go to college, what college? If I'm going to study something in college, what am I going to study? Major decision, right? And the other one is, who am I going to marry? Both of these are what I'd call mountainside decisions. These are decisions that are going to have some ramifications for you, whether you like it or whether you don't like it. They're going to have an influence on you for the rest of your life. For these young kids, and I feel with it, I was there, I understand. That's a hard decision. What do I do with my life? And I'm having to make that at such a young age. And as parents, we all say, well, I'm going to let my kids make that decision. I'm not going to tell them what to do. Right. We're feeding all sorts of information that way, right? This might help you. Consider this, consider that. And how many times are we pushing them decisions that's going to push them right in the trap that Lot fell into? Let's pursue a path that brings lots of prosperity, fame, and fortune to you and yourself. And we don't push them in directions that's going to encourage them to honor and glorify God in everything they do. And the same thing with getting married. How many making a marriage decision, who to marry, we make a decision based on who is it that's going to be the most, going to hold me the most accountable to God in my walk with God. Who's going to be the best spiritual influence that I can find? Who's going to help me live the kind of life, the spiritual life I need to live? And instead, we make those decisions based on a number of other factors, a number of other worldly factors. So I think you're starting to get the picture, right? Many of our young children today are growing up learning what marriage is like based on what they see on television and the movies. Well, all television and the movies is an image. It's an image of what's not real. How many kids are making marriage decisions? How many kids grow up knowing what a good marriage looks like based on what the scriptures tell them a good marriage looks like, or based upon the godly example your marriage has provided for them? And you know, as I'm talking about this, I can't go forward without bringing this up. Peter, in writing to the Christians about the dangers of false teachers and warning Christians about falling away, makes this comment, and in it is a little piece about Lot I wanted to highlight. And it said, Lot was a righteous man, living among them day after day, and was tormented by the lawless deeds he saw and heard. Well, that's an interesting description about Lot. A righteous man distressed by the depraved conduct of the lawless. Who does that sound like? Sounds like us. We're trying to live righteous lives. We're trying to live righteous lives in an environment that is completely lawless. Go back to thoughts and words, actions and habits and character. One more fateful decision I want to talk about this morning. This one involving David. And again, you can read one verse of this text, and you know exactly where I'm going with this. So I'm not going to get into the text itself in great detail. But were there some consequences to this misstep by David? Yeah, major consequences. Murder, death of a small child. This bullet 3 through 5, there was just a little bit of calamity that followed David as a result of this decision, right? And what do you think was going through David's mind when he made the decision that day to go for an evening stroll and put himself in a position to come across Bathsheba? And what do you think he was thinking when he told his messengers to go get her? It's a lesson for another day, but sometimes when we go looking for something we shouldn't be looking for, we shouldn't be surprised when we find it, right? A good man, a man after God's own heart. Acts 13:22, 1 Samuel 13:22, who still made a bad decision that led to many unfortunate consequences. And really, are our life consequences, are our life circumstances any different than what Lot and David encountered? We still have places today just like Sodom. You say, well, I can't randomly stumble into an environment where there's full nudity and perverse sexual acts going on, can I? We're never offered a major promotion and a job that's going to bring us much more power and prestige if we move to a new location and away from a spiritual environment, are we? We don't push our kids to pursue occupational directions that's going to push them right into the world full force, do we? And surely we wouldn't go around to the entertainment district on a business trip just to get some fresh air. And the point I'm trying to make, simple point I'm trying to make, is we, even the most righteous among us, need to be careful. The world tells us these decisions are okay. And in fact, in some ways, the world tells you it's justified. Go ahead, please yourself, do what's good for you. Look out for number one. These are the kind of things we're going to be talking about in this class. And I'm not going to end these classes. I'm going to try to every time we have one with some practical reminders of some spiritual things you already know, but just in a friendly way need to be reminded about, we need to be doing. And today I'm going to end with a few of these. One, it always starts with prayer. When you've got big decisions to make, don't make them without prayer. It tells us we are to pray in all circumstances. Well, I suspect all circumstances includes when you're making decisions, especially big decisions. Pray often and for specific insights. How about define and evaluate options? We read in Luke 14, Jesus even given us a couple of examples. One about don't go off and build a tire without first checking to make sure you have enough materials to build them. Or going to war, making sure you have enough in your troop force to accomplish the objectives you need. So we do need to do some planning, right? Define issues and options. And if you don't have enough information, time out. Find the information you need. And this consequences piece, boy, that's not to be taken lightly. We've got to evaluate consequences of some of these decisions and avoid snap decisions. We're not going to talk about it today, but one of the lessons along the series we're going to talk about is sometimes we avoid making decisions because they're relatively hard, but we put them off because we can, and we put them off and put them off and put them off, and pretty soon we box ourselves in a corner. And now we've got to make a snap decision, and maybe a decision we don't want to make. So know your options, fully consider, and vet them. Prayer again, back to prayer. Ask for wisdom. The text says, when you ask, believe and not doubt. And even Proverbs 2:4 tells us when we're looking for wisdom, look for it as if we're seeking a treasure. We know these things, but we don't always do them. Seek godly counsel. There is safety in talking to our godly brothers and sisters. Sometimes it may be just a family member. Sometimes maybe a friend you can trust. Sometimes you may want to talk to the elders. You may want to talk to Sean, or you may want to talk to Jordan. And if you're not sure, just look around this room. This room is loaded with wisdom sitting in all these seats in here today. And finally, when you make your decisions, trust the Lord with your decision. What a comforting thought. Trusting that you have made the right choice and putting it in the hands of God to move forward. You know, if we make our life choices with the intent of pleasing and honoring God, this is easy. When we make decisions with the intent of honoring and pleasing us, that's when the decisions get difficult. Because a lot of times what's difficult about it is we're trying to justify to ourselves if it's the right decision. So the decision is not that hard. This is where Abram was on the side of the mountain when this decision was made. Now you probably see today why I've selected Lot and David as my two examples, right? Pretty easy to see. In Lot, an example of a righteous man distressed by the depraved conduct of the world around him. And David, a man after God's own heart, still made a bad decision. And that's us. We're in the same boat. Of course, David, and it's another lesson for another day, gives us a view of a truly repentant heart and God's willingness to forgive. But he made a bad decision in this case. And I would tell you, if given a choice between heaven and the world, David and Lot would always choose heaven. But given a choice of heaven and the world in this particular instance, they chose the world. And the same thing can happen to us if we're not careful. So I'm not telling you today not to go out and take that new job promotion. I'm not telling you today not to do some of the things you want to do. I'm just telling you, don't make decisions without involving God in those decisions. Trust in Him. Put your trust in Him to make the right decision. You just never know what evil influences are out there lurking right behind you, right? I think I've heard a bell, and we're close to the donuts. So I'm about to wrap up. But does anybody have any comments before I shut down today? I appreciate all of you guys listening. I hope it was beneficial to you. And if this is a class for you in the future, I hope you'll come back and join us next week, Lord willing. We're going to be talking about being careful what you say. So thank you guys very much. I'll let you go.